How do you thread the needle between a healthy interest in eating good food and taking care of your body versus an unhealthy obsession with doing the same thing? Jacob Laub, hello, my friend. Welcome back.
Jeff Krasno, good to be back.
Okay, so we're convened again. We were together about 2 months ago talking about communes and intentional communities. And today we're going to talk about another topic that you have a direct relationship with by dint of your own personal experience. So maybe I'll begin by saying 5 years and 8 or 9 moons ago, we founded Commune with the ambitious mission of bringing wellness to 1 billion people. And
if they can do it with hamburgers, we can do it with video online courses.
That's true. We put up our not so golden arches. And this is an episode about overshooting the mark. And maybe we educated some people too much about being healthy.
Ourselves. Basically, you're saying that I've directly produced 150 online wellness courses over the past 5 years, directly been involved, listened to them, etc. And that's a lot of information and to-dos and hacks related to personal wellness.
Absolutely. And then on my side, I've read hundreds of books and sat in this very seat with many a doctor, nutritionist, sage, mystic, and other yogi teacher of some ilk. And of course, because we are curious human beings, we have not been shy about applying many of these pills and praxis and mushrooms and modalities on ourselves. So, so just as product of our own N-of-1 experiments and jumping into our own petri dishes, that's been very gratifying, but also somewhat overwhelming at times. And, dovetails with this emerging condition, though I believe it was originally dubbed in 1998, but seems to be more in the zeitgeist now. And the word is orthorexia.
Yeah, I'll give a little more background on myself. I was a professional dancer, and particularly a professional ballet dancer in a previous lifetime, then a yoga teacher, then creating online video courses. Back in the ballet days, anorexia was talked about, but certainly not orthorexia. That was not a term that was bandied about.
Yeah. You are going round the circle of samsara here in your various vocational iterations, but all of them that have some very deep connection to the body. So,
yes.
So maybe we start with anorexia, and we'll do some definitional work here up top to the best of our ability. So what does anorexia mean, and what's the difference between anorexia and anorexia nervosa, et cetera? And we'll back our way into the ortho.
You're going to stretch the limits of my Greek, but I did some research before this.
Good.
Orexia, eating. The A is the not. So not eating, anorexia. And then nervosa is nervously, or you could say pathologically. So nervously not eating would be the direct translation.
Yes. I think that is the direct translation. I think more clinically might be sort of nervosa represents the pathology or the psychological state, et cetera. And then the anorexia is the sort of without appetite or not eating component. Obviously, this has incredibly detrimental knock-on impacts, and it's obviously considered a mental disorder, but it is distinct from orthorexia. So in what ways?
Ortho is like correct or right or literally straight eating nervously or pathologically. And the interesting thing there is that anorexia is, at this point, culturally, something you do nervously, quietly. There's a shame component to it. Mm-hmm. Well, there's the shame component to orthorexia too, but it's often something that people are evangelizing themselves or looking at others doing it and saying, look at how well I'm eating, or feeling good in a certain way about it. But then it's kind of like a cage with wallpaper. You don't even necessarily realize that you've put yourself in a cage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anorexia obviously is very clearly identified as a mental disorder and connected or correlated with so many, other mental disorders, depression and anxiety, et cetera. Orthorexia is very different in that respect. It's not necessarily characterized from a kind of the DSM perspective with those things, but has its other kind of signatures. So,
though interestingly, it is correlated with things like OCD and other mental disorders, and that can lead to a tendency to be more susceptible to falling down the orthorexic wormhole.
It's actually ironic now that I think about it that it means ortho, the prefix means right or correct or straightened. And so then I think of the other orthos that I don't like, like Orthodox religion or the orthodontist, two things that I seem to assiduously avoid. Anyways, orthorexia. So how does orthorexia actually present kind of more day to day to people?
Well, let me speak a little bit about my own experience, which with all of these conditions, there is a spectrum, and it's a little unclear from a clinical. It's difficult to from what I've been reading, it's difficult to sometimes clinically diagnose something like orthorexia because it has positive aspects to it. But it is being so focused on eating well that it is interfering with your life in a whole variety of different ways. So I remember Julia and I showing up to a break fast. So literally we had not eaten all day for a religious holiday with our own food because we didn't want to eat the food that was going to be there. And like nervously in the corner, like to make sure that we weren't offending the host, and yet we weren't going to eat the food, and yet we were in the corner like eating our own salad.
Yes, that is certainly a presentation in that particular case of orthodox orthorexia. but yeah, I actually had that in my notes as I was thinking about it. I was like, yeah, those people that show up at the dinner parties and bring their own food,
or don't go. I mean,
don't go.
And that's kind of what happens is like you're calling ahead to the restaurant to make sure that they have something that you can eat, or you're turning down social engagements because you're worried about what you're going to eat. Yeah, I mean, it can interfere in many, many different ways.
From a social perspective, essentially it can truncate or abbreviate your social connections just because of this obsession that you have with what might be served at that event or dinner party. Yeah.
Yes.
And obviously we know we have a company called Commune. So
this was in my notes too, that social connections are maybe, in fact, the Harvard study, Waldinger, that who was just on the podcast, the number one predictor of health and longevity is the strength of your social connections. So you might be trading the wrong things.
Right. So you might be, eating, your broccoli and your quinoa or whatever.
Oh, that's basic level stuff. We're on to broccoli sprouts.
Yeah.
Come on, Jeff.
No, fair enough. I'm just trying to make this more accessible to the average orthorexic. Okay. But so you
sea plankton, crowd juice. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what you're sacrificing there. So you might be eating those things and getting the benefit of those micronutrients and polyphenols and all that stuff. But what you're sacrificing there is that social connection that is so prevalent around food. And obviously you look at the blue zones, and this is one of the signatures of that, right? So,
well, and then the other thing is you're also giving yourself a serving of stress, almost always at that level. And certainly anyone who's, again, this is a spectrum. So if you've ever gone and maybe had a meal that wasn't ortho, straight, on the line, and then you're super stressed about it, and
Yeah.
then almost trying to make it up in your other eating. And we just did a course with on intermittent fasting with Dr. Will Cole, and he said something great, which was essentially like, don't serve yourself up a serving of stress with your food.
Yeah. I wonder what the USRDA allowance is for stress.
Zero.
Zero. Okay, fair enough. Well, then, and then when you do deviate from your stringent plan, there is a sort of a self-immolation, right? There's like a self-punishment that goes along with that. And then, there's shame and guilt and
Yeah, and I want to be clear that I actually don't think that I would have clinically diagnosed myself. There are much more extreme versions of this, but I feel that I have enough. I've given myself enough self-shame and stress about what I've eaten. It's been a process that has been something that I've actively had to work on and start to unwind.
Yeah. And obviously there's a strict focus on quality of food, but
well, that is actually part of the definition of orthorexia, which is obsessively focused on the quality of food, which is interesting because I thought I was very progressive saying for recently and for quite a while that I was a qualitarian. When people ask like, oh, are you, vegan, vegetarian, whatever, I was like, no, I'm a qualitarian. I'll eat meat, but if it's from a good source. And I actually still do believe that, but then it literally is a straight line out over the cliff.
Yeah. And so associated with eating the highest quality is also a judgment or feeling of moral superiority over those who do not. Not in every case, obviously, but I look at like vegans, for example, and the vegan police never goes off duty, like that. And so
the qualitarian police also sometimes can never, especially with parents or in-laws, and then you bring children into it, and it's a whole other. It's like this is something that's out of your control, but you feel so. I mean, there was a point where I caught Julia stuffing spinach into blueberries, like
wow, yeah.
And I was like, listen, this is
we used to shoot our oranges full of like syringes of vodka. That's how we would sneak alcohol into the football games. But this is a different approach.
I thought you were gonna say to like make your children go to sleep or something. Yeah. I was like, brilliant.
Oh, we did that too.
Except as we know, alcohol does not actually improve sleep quality, and another podcast.
Fair enough. Well, that seems slightly overboard. So I wonder how did she actually get the spinach? Was this like a dehydrated spinach? No,
I did. There were large blueberries.
Large blueberries.
I don't know. I did remember this though, and anyways,
right. It's like,
and she's not alone in this. I'm calling her out in that particular.
I think she is alone in that actually. But okay, fair enough. Yeah. There are other people who have taken extreme measures.
No, I'm saying that I am part of the relationship and also have been known to like, put the syringe of fermented cod liver oil in Maeva's mouth. And anyways.
Yeah. Fair enough. So obviously this phenomena is in no small part a reaction to kind of diet culture and influencer culture, right? Because here we are, all trying to attain some kind of, unattainable, really, perfection of beauty that is, you don't have to turn your head just to see it, on Instagram or billboards or newspapers or magazine covers, etc. And, requisite to that is like a comparison, so it's like you're either, we quickly address this notion of like, you see someone on the street, maybe they're
French fry shaming. Is that what you're talking about? Fry
so
shaming,
maybe they don't appear to be too healthy. They're eating a Big Mac and you're like, boy, yeah, that person doesn't have any willpower, or there's a feeling of subtle moral superiority.
And I even want to call it out right now when I was talking about like fermented cod liver. Part of me was like, yeah, I'm super on top of it and no more, and am taking better care of my child because of something like that.
Yeah,
And this is
absolutely.
the process of noticing and separating, like, what is a healthy care for your child's nutrition or your own nutrition. And
Well, yeah, it's also like I have the same reaction kind of in an ecological way of like when I see someone like driving a massive gas guzzler and there I am with my nice little electric vehicle or something like that. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, they really shouldn't be doing that.
yeah, and
I'm
then you have
judging
to
that.
examine your massive amount of privilege.
Yeah.
Well, the gas guzzler is a little different, but certainly in my case, especially on the nutrition stuff, the massive amount of privilege that goes along with having.
Yeah. So there's
this
that.
condition.
So there's that direction. There's sort of this feeling of moral superiority sometimes associated with the highest quality of food that you might be obsessed with. But then there's the other direction, which is like, you know, you're staring at someone, well, you might not be, but certainly most people with like the most, you know, chiseled abs on earth. And you're like, oh, okay, well, wait a minute. Like, I'm not enough, you know, and now I'm chasing that thing. And so that also fuels your orthorexia in this other direction of unhealthy obsession.
Well, you say doesn't apply to me, but interestingly, I took perception in college. It was one of the like required electives. And one of the things I remember was them talking about your idea of the most beautiful face is the average of all faces you've seen. And in my case, ballet is a profession that culls the population for ectomorphs, like people that are naturally long and slim, puts them into an exercise routine where they're exercising for like 8 to 10 hours a day. And then that is who you hang out with all day long. Yeah. And it really gave me, like, it's not something you choose. It's like, these are the bodies I'm looking at for the most amount of time all day. It gave me a very warped sense of what was a normal body. And I will say it was really awful for my first long-term relationship. I still think of some things I said during that relationship and were like, so off base.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine that if any cohort in the world has body dysmorphia, it might be dancers. I mean, certainly like my girls are dancers and I have the distinct privilege of schlepping them to competitions and recitals and whatnot. In fact, I have to do that tomorrow. And all they talk about in the back seat the entire time are bodies. So I'm very torn about it because obviously I'm so excited that they have a passion and that they're healthy and that they're moving their bodies in all these particular ways. And the double-edged sword there is that they, you know, become quite obsessed with this topic.
Well, I had an interesting connect the dots moment as we've moved through this conversation, which is that as the health and wellness culture and education environment has exploded over the past 10 years, you know, when I was a dancer, the only way, if you thought, oh, I need to be thinner, the only kind of option that kind of mostly came to mind was don't eat. Yeah. And now there's actually there's this whole other panoply of paths that you can take, but the starting point is still a place of not enough. And but it still takes you to dark places. It's just now not, there were fewer options for your nervosa, I guess.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess the question would be like, how do you thread the needle there between having a sort of, I guess I would say, a healthy interest in eating good food and taking care of your body, you know, versus an unhealthy obsession with doing the same thing?
Well, this is the middle path all the way. And this is where my Buddhist leanings have really, I have to work when I most actively practice. It is on this sort of thing. It is on the middle path because it is not one way or the other. And the middle path in some ways is, as you fully know, the hardest path, because if you're just going to go all to the one direction or all the other, you can just push it and you push it up to the wall. But the middle path is a path that is a balance. And there's no right answer. It's constantly changing as your entire environment and life and psyche is changing.
Yeah. I think the bullseye there is that to be non-dogmatic, non-fundamentalist, non-orthodox, if you will, about these topics and have, suppleness and flexibility and grace, for yourself. I mean, you bring up Madhyamaka, the middle way, it's actually quite literally arose out of the Buddha's relationship with food. He
one grain of rice.
Yeah. He left his palace and went out and, saw all these sadhus, and they're like, oh, I want to be like the sadhus. And he fasted, potentially apocryphally on, one single grain of rice per day. Not sure how that's physiologically possible over time, but let's just give it to him. And then,
you're missing some essential amino acids, right? That's what you actually are talking about.
True, but he was probably having whole grain rice. So anyways, he was getting plenty of fiber. But see, this is the problem. We know too much about this shit. But then,
Buddhists no more.
Yeah. Then prior to the Bodhi tree, awakening, this was an issue. He basically, the Buddha came to the realization that, the middle way, that asceticism really wasn't the path to awakening. But neither was sort of what became Epicureanism or hedonism or something, that there was this middle path, between, indulgence and asceticism. And, that's the tightrope.
Yeah. Well, where I want to go with this is that what is the deeper level and what is the deeper fear and not enoughness? And I think a lot of it comes down to fear of death.
Yeah.
And so the place I've made the most progress is actually working on my fear of death. And
we'll make this connection more directly, because people might be like, what the fuck is he talking about?
Well,
he's like, you were just talking about, fiber content.
Living in a human body is scary.
Yeah.
And our world is kind of scary. And we talk in the personal development side that you need to have agency and stand up for yourself. Well, what is one in this crazy world? What is one of the things that you feel like you can control on a daily basis? Is your food. It is something that we feel we have a lot of agency about. And so as we move through, as we deal with the chaos of life and the fear that brings up in us, this is why orthorexia and OCD sometimes can go together. That's an attempt to control. And why do we want control? I mean, I love the 5 whys. You just keep asking why. And if you do that, why do I want to eat healthy? Well, I want to be able to, it doesn't take 5 whys. I want to be able to live longer and enjoy life. Why do you want to, do that? Well, I'm afraid of death.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I'm afraid
of it ending.
Yeah. And especially a long, painful, protracted ending.
Well, that's that's a more sophisticated, know too much answer there, Jeff. But I'm just talking about control and
totally. Well, it is why, and this might be a bridge into the sort of increasing obsession with devices and biometrics and biomarkers, et cetera. I think it's why, people who wear Apple Watches, they need to finish their steps. They need to get their 10,000 steps, because that gives them a sense of control. And if you're 50 steps short before you go to bed, you're going to walk around the bed 50 times.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've literally, an employee, I was out finishing a shoot and it was dark and rainy and I was under a raincoat carrying some gear back, and she was walking around and I was I was really surprised. What are you doing? She's like, I'm finishing my steps.
Yeah, you got to finish.
And part of it was I guess must have been fairly sedentary in the studio that day. And there's a part that's admirable. And then there's a part that's because physiology is not, it's not all or nothing. So let's just talk about your half glass of wine last night.
Yeah. So the confession comes here on the podcast. So like many others, I vowed to be a better man this year than I was last year. Part of that included dry January. Glass half full. I made it through 19 days last night. It's been kind of a slog, honestly, this month. We've talked about it. And last night I went out. It wasn't like a rager. I just went out with Skylar and the kids. But, there was a, fuck it mentality, and I just had a glass of wine. Okay.
You told me it was a half glass on the phone this morning.
I know. See, and now I'm coming slightly more clean. It was not let's say it just wasn't a country club pour. It was like just a normal pour. Okay. And initially it did taste good, but I wasn't in receipt of this GABAergic relaxation, the way that I would normally be with a glass of wine. My reaction was honestly just shame and guilt, and I had made this promise, and now I'd come up short, and tomorrow I'm going to do a podcast about health, and prattle on all this wisdom, but I can't even follow my own, and
Yeah, and that's the orthodoxy built in. And as someone who knows physiology pretty well, how much of a difference is one glass of wine going to make into your lifetime of overall much healthier habits at this point? Yeah. Versus the stress. And this is I think a really interesting conversation that I want to get into, which is we think that food is matter, and thus it must matter more because we're we're matter. We're made of physicality, and food's physicality. And so given the choice between I'm going to eat this thing, or if I don't eat it, I'm going to worry about it. I'd rather not eat it, but to have mental things. That's actually a more subtle understanding of the body that I'm coming to, is that the body is just listening, period. Your physiology, the gestalt of your physiology is a big listener, and it has all these different ways of listening. Yeah. And there are elements of food that we realize now are not even being digested by your physiology, but are simply serving as communication. That is why there's other reasons too. Your microbiome is consuming some of them, but
there's information
in your food.
Yeah.
And your thoughts are also information. And you know what? If you are so worried about the fluoride in your water that you are worried about it, guess what? You're already putting toxicity into your physiology via the worry, probably more so than the thing that you're worried about.
Absolutely. I mean, we know this by dint of direct experience all the time. I could scream at Cooper right now and be like, there's a snake over there on the floor. And if she believed me, we know the endocrine cascade that would happen from me just saying something, creating sound waves that would trigger this HPA axis kind of whole deal. And she would make a hormone literally out of cholesterol in her adrenal glands, actually piece of matter, if you will, a molecule that would essentially have all these downstream impacts that would raise her respiratory rate and take all the blood away from her stomach and put it out to her extremities, because she'd be like, fuck, I got to get away from this snake. And what does that do to your digestion? Well,
that's where I was going is stress hormone is antithetical for absorption of nutrients. So the irony is that you can eat a nutritious meal, and if you don't feel it's nutritious enough and you have stress about it, you are actually, so then there's something very meta. Then do you stress about the fact that you're stressed about, and then you need to go meditate. Yeah, essentially that's the answer there.
Well, but this is why never eat anything while you're staring at social media, because the whole architecture of social media is designed to trigger your human negativity bias, and that will create an endocrine cascade such that you're not going to digest your food well, just period. So stress and digestion are just oil and water essentially.
But you see where it comes back to introspection and contemplation, whether you want to say it's fear of death or whatever. Yeah. There is you cannot escape yourself. and your feelings about yourself and your feelings about your self-worth. And you have to address them at some point, and addressing them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It does often come back to meditation or whatever method that you can leverage to find a degree of awareness of your own self and your own bottom-up behaviors and your own unconscious.
Well, you notice, oh, I noticed that I'm shaming myself for what I did or didn't do health-wise yesterday. First step is always notice.
100%. And you, in noticing, you question the reward system.
Yes.
So you can build up these habits. There's like some sort of cue, some feeling, some emotion that surfaces. We often talk about like eating our emotions, for example, right? So there's some emotion that that surfaces. You have a behavioral, reaction where, okay, well, you go to the cupboard and you get a bag of potato chips. That gives you some sort of reward, some dopaminergic kind of reward. You sit in that reward space, and then you repeat that behavior such that it becomes deeply embedded kind of neurally and somatically. And then all of a sudden you have a habit, and that reward system, of course, is maladaptive really long term. So finding that space, that awareness between stimulus and response, et cetera, always gives you that ability to reframe, re-question, the reward system, and is it adaptive or is it maladaptive? And, I think it's extremely hard to do.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially to rewire your brain to reestablish new habits that are adaptive.
But I will say that habits are important. It's the grace when something takes you out of that habit or out of that routine to not then let it be.
Yeah, punish yourself.
Well,
that's honestly to bookend your outing of my dry January failure. I woke up this morning and I was like, okay, I'm not perfect. And today I'm resurrected once again with the opportunity to walk in my highest principles. And here we go. I'm off to the gym, and that's fine. And just like give yourself a little freaking grace.
Well, and the other thing that I think is interesting is that we often, the big benefits, this is kind of going to tie in a few different themes. One is in the content industry, we are creating content about wellness all the time. And yet the really basic stuff is really basic, like sleep more, eat whole foods, mostly plants, like to paraphrase. Oh man, I'm going to redo that. Eat whole foods, not too much, mostly plants. What's his name?
Michael Pollan.
Well, yeah, to paraphrase Michael Pollan, eat whole foods, not too much, mostly plants. Like that, he started out with a really big book, and then that's kind of the three sentences that he says sums it up.
Yeah, major in the majors, don't major in the minors.
Yeah, but as a content industry, where there is a lot to talk about is at the far little fringes of whatever it is. And then I also think in our own lives, we focus on like, okay, food, I've learned a lot about this, or exercise, and you try and optimize all the way to the very end. But of course, it's diminishing returns as you get, versus looking at the whole kind of spectrum of your life and saying relationships, sleep, food, exercise,
stress management.
Where am I weakest actually? And bring some attention and love to that. Whereas we often go to where we're strongest and focus and just hope all the other pieces fix themselves. But we're down to the, 0.5%, 1% improvements.
Yeah. And let's be honest and call ourselves out. I mean, we just released a course where, that encourages people to take 2.5 grams of leucine, to trigger muscle protein synthesis, et cetera. And so, there is that I suppose, level of specificity in knowledge, which I actually find to be incredibly fun to learn about. And, we're both obviously incredibly curious about these things. And if you're going to become an expert in anything, right, you love to go into the details of things. I think
It's
maybe
recognizing when it stops to be enjoyable, because I actually have been following a bit of that course, and it's been great. And you know what? I've actually seen some really interesting benefits in my satiety and performance in jujitsu and things like that. And it's fun.
Yeah.
And when I don't get my protein shake because I'm doing other things, I don't care. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, I think you made actually a good connection there, maybe unwittingly, which was that, you feel great in jujitsu, but that is a very subjective measurement of success or of health, right? And I think that where we get into trouble is when we separate, the subjective measures of health from the objective ones. So it's very easy to focus on the objective metrics of health because what you can measure, you can improve. And that is certainly true. I put on my continuous glucose monitor. I've talked about it, endlessly. And that was really helpful for me. I saw that my, fasting blood glucose was very high, and I took all sorts of measures and protocols to address it. And it was very helpful to be able to measure it as an objective marker. But I think where it actually then became adaptive and truly healthful is when I was able to actually marry the subjective feelings that I had about vitality and good health with the objective measurements. And that was I think the Satori for me, which was okay, I don't need to rely on my Oura Ring score to tell me that I had a good night's sleep.
Yeah. And I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, which is, in that course, which is JJ Virgin's course called Age Powerfully, fantastic course. She asks people and is really adamant that they track their macros, which in other words means track literally put into this app everything that you're eating all day. And that was, I almost had a conversation with her. It was a little triggering for me because that level of tracking would trigger, for example, in me, a cascade of other control issues. But I recognize that for people that maybe have never done that and are trying to do a significant body recomposition, they will notice, you will certainly notice your eating patterns really fast, and that it is a shortcut to recognizing what you're eating. And to bring Buddhist philosophy, to weave it continually in here, it's it's the boat to get across the river, and then you don't pick up the boat and keep going. And so can you use these sort of tools when you need them to create the level of self-knowledge and attention in your life to get to the point and notice how they connect to the subjective, to feeling good, and then drop them and know when to drop them and just go off of how you feel.
Yeah. 100%. And know when to weave them back in when you need them. There is, what's it called? Hawthorne effect. So any subject that is studied will behave differently. It's sort of like the equivalent of in physics, observer's effect, really.
Yeah.
And so you will behave differently if you are being studied. Now, of course, with a continuous glucose monitor or an Oura Ring, you're essentially studying yourself. But I do find that when I'm wearing the CGM and I'm checking it regularly, that I do behave differently because I'm sort of under my own microscope. And that is helpful, at times during the holiday season, for example, when I might be indulging or overindulging in too much,
it's a reminder.
merriment.
It helps remind you, oh, wow, I actually really don't feel very good, and I can see that I didn't sleep very well, and I can track that back to etc.
Right. Yeah, I think the moral of the story is we want to just feel good. We want to feel vibrant and vital and not lose sight of the fact that that is really the most important output, not how many steps you may have gotten on any particular day.
Yeah, well, I think that really encapsulates quite a lot, that well-being is ultimately so much more important than like how you eat or how you exercise. It's this constellation of factors that weave together that creates a fulfilling, vibrant life. And if you are not feeling, if you are experiencing brain fog and fatigue, it's worth looking into and maybe getting nitty gritty and detailed and experimenting. And that's a narrowing of the aperture. And then you have to remember to broaden the aperture once you've made progress on whatever your issue is. So as I feel we're kind of moving towards wrap up, there is one anecdote related to this that I have been wanting to share with you, because it's an anecdote I've actually told you before, but with a different twist on it.
A new punchline?
A new punchline.
Okay.
So when you co-founded Wanderlust Festival, I was on tour with you for years and years and years. And we would show up at these mountain ski resorts where we would have the yoga festivals, but the crew and staff would show up a full week or 3 days or 4 days early. And it was always like somewhat comical, somewhat difficult, because you would show up at these mountain restaurants because we were away from home in hotel rooms, and the options were very limited and much more like mountain food. And the poor waiters would know us because we'd go to the same resorts every year, and they would come to the table, big table, because all the staff was eating together, and like get all of the special diet. Can you do the broccoli, but with no oil and steamed? And can you do this and this and that? Is the pasta gluten-free? Do you have gluten? And I just remember one particularly frazzled waiter just like let out this long sigh and was like, guys, the Wanderlust Yogi menu starts tomorrow. Can you just order? And I used to tell it almost as an anecdote as how bad the mountain food was. And now I look back and I actually say, wow, how inflexible were we? Like a day or two later, the food trucks of like, I have to remember actually, the food trucks of like organic naan with lentils grown and, smashed by organic elephants was coming. And we couldn't just like have pasta for one night.
Yeah. Well, we're both obviously Alan Watts aficionados and fans. And, he often talked about how we, confuse the symbol of something for the thing itself.
Yeah, the map for the territory.
The map for the territory, the menu for the food. And, for example, like your bank account with what wealth really is. And it's actually interesting. I think I read somewhere that orthorexia is actually highly correlated with people that are like hand wringers about their finances. Like they balance their checkbooks, assiduously. This is not necessarily a bad thing to do.
None of this is bad things to do. That's kind of that's why it's so difficult. That's why it's not anorexia. It's something that is evangelized and is such a difficult tightrope to walk.
100%. And I think where I'm going here is that your true wealth is not represented by the balance in your checking account. Your true wealth is really the sum of all of these different components of your life. And, I would say so is your true health. It's just you look across, the gamut of what it means to be holistically well. We talk about this, quite often with Commune is, yes, there is certainly a physiological component to that, but obviously a relational and social and psychological and emotional and financial and all of these components that go into what it means to live a full and vibrant life. And that life, like any mystical experience must be felt as the product of direct experience. And yes, we can create proxies for measuring those things. That's fine, but never lose sight of the fact that this is a subjective feeling, and that is what it truly means to be alive.
And you have to be ready and there and present and open to notice that feeling when it walks into your life.
True, true. Okay, mic drop. Well done. Always fun. We'll find another topic soon.
For sure, Jeff. Love it.
Hey, thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then I think you'll love this one too.